we as a species are facing is that the three-dimensional world has been pulled out from beneath our feet and we don't even realize what happened. How do you know what's you versus not you? How do I know what's me versus not me? And where is this illusion of me? Where does it end? Does it end at the skin? Is it the brain? This idea that consciousness exists. When you break a radio, the broadcast station doesn't go off the air. The music isn't inside the radio any more than consciousness is inside of our brain. There's something that's happening now that's happening so fast that the illusion of past, present, and future are disintegrating.
Guy here. As I record this, I've literally just got back from New Zealand. We ran a one-day workshops in Auckland and Tauranga, and wow, phenomenal. New Zealand, if you happen to be watching this in New Zealand, we're definitely coming back. It was amazing, but my body is definitely feeling it as well, though. I digress, though, because my epic guest today is Rick Levine, and he is one of the top astrologers on the planet and most respected, I believe, and he was fabulous. The guy is just awesome, and this is a mind-blowing conversation that covers a lot of ground, from astrology to consciousness to quantum physics to time, and also what is happening on the planet right now and what astrology is saying. That's in the later part of the podcast. It goes everywhere, and it's, amazing. I've never really been into astrology personally. It's not something I've been drawn to, I always feel like I'm the master of my own destiny and fate kind of thing. But after listening to Rick today, it's definitely opened my paradigm around astrology as well. So be sure to let me know what you think of this conversation in the show notes below, and also where you are in the world as well. It's always great connecting with you guys. On that as well, what we're up to, our Bali retreat, which will be in end of April, early May, June 2020, June. Where am I? You can tell I've just got back from New Zealand. Basically, our Bali retreat is sold out, which is phenomenal. We have one more Australian retreat here in June, I believe, and we will be in Split, Croatia in November. And of course, if you are in Australia, we are up and down the coast running our introductory one-day workshops as well, which is an epic place to start. And there's links below in the show notes as well for free meditations and everything else of how we can best support you, along with our link to Rick's stuff as well. Anyway, enjoy this podcast. Much love from me. It's awesome. Rick, welcome to the podcast.
Really nice to be here, wherever here is these
Absolutely.
days.
I am a complete novice to this topic. So if I ask silly questions, I apologize up front. But before we start, just for listeners to get to know you a little bit, if you were at a intimate dinner table right now and you sat next to a complete stranger and they said, "What's your passion? What do you do for a living?" How would you reply?
I would reply that since my late teenage years, my passion is trying to understand how meta, and I do not mean the corporation, how meta becomes physical.
What?
In other words, you look at your life or my office, my room, and there's books and artifacts and musical collections and pictures of people and things and family members. And how do we start from a single cell of nothing and accumulate a constellation that we call our lives? And what is the process by which nothingness becomes somethingness? That is my passion. How does meta or metaphysical become physical?
There's so many ways we could go from there straight away. So what did you discover from 15 years of age to now? Like, what would be the dot points?
Well, it was more like about 18 or 19 years, late teenage. And what I've discovered is it doesn't matter how much anyone knows, they don't know shit. I mean, that's a technical term, use of the word shit. What I've discovered is that there are many ways in which we can push out the limits of what we call our consciousness, whether they be through learning, taking PhD programs, whether they be through yoga or meditation or tantric breathing exercises or physical endurance exercises, or entheogenic or psychedelic plants or substances, or being in love or listening to music. There's so many ways in which we can push those limits outward. And for me, astrology has been one of those most important ways of making what was previously invisible or previously unconscious or previously not part of our awareness, bringing that into our awareness. And that's why I don't like to call myself, when people say, "What are you?" or "What do you do?" I normally say I'm a breather, because that's what I do most of the time. But as an astrologer, I'm interested in looking at generalized patterns and trying to relate what we might call the macrocosm, that which is greater, bigger, out there, to the microcosm, that which is within, subatomic or unconscious. And how do these two cosms, and the word cosm, as you may know, comes from a Greek word that meant or means order and beauty, because to the Greeks, order was beautiful. And when we talk about the cosmos, we're really talking about a Greek, the Greek concept of a beautiful order. Interestingly, it's the same etymology as the word cosmetic, which used to mean to bring out the natural beauty of the order that was already there. But of course, in modern Western culture, we think of a cosmetic as something to hide the ugly. And therein lies part of the problem that we in the West, or we in maybe the modern age, are in. But astrology has become a really primary tool for me in how the macrocosm, the larger beautiful order, and the microcosm, the small, tiny, invisible order, how those two are linked, or perhaps maybe even are one and the same. And their illusion of being an outer and an inner is where the journey actually begins.
Wow. Wow. I'm just listening to every word you just said, mate. So, taking that from the macrocosm to the microcosm, and that they could actually all be the same thing, one, when we look at that, then through that exploration, it begs the question, there's two questions that come to me. Then what are we? What is consciousness? What have you explored from that in this time together? Because what you're saying, and certainly after my own personal experiences, that's why I've been asking these questions, because once I have experience, it becomes undeniable. But yet when I experience reality through my five senses, it's very different, if that makes sense.
It does make sense, but therein lies the problem, because we think of reality as that which we perceive through our five senses. And that's really more what the Hindus call Maya, or the veil that hides us from true reality. We think that this three-dimensional play of apparent solidity of colors that we perceive, seeing is believing, we confuse that with reality. And that is really the Western dilemma, or modern man's dilemma, is that when we say what's real, it's seeing is believing. It's hitting the desk and feeling that solidity. That's what's real. But that's part of the illusion that has been busted by 20th century science, as they began to delve, using technological breakthroughs, as they began to delve into the microcosm, the small, beautiful order, the subatomic realms, and they watched the laws of the universe, Newton's mechanics, the three-dimensional reality of cause and effect, and gravity, and local space, and all of these concepts that we believed to be reality. They disintegrated over a decade or two. And this is where we find ourselves today, when we realize that when we said at the very beginning, you said, "We are here." And I said, "Okay, where is here?" It wasn't meant to be some wise ass joke. Here used to be local space. If we were here, we were in the same space. But now, on the computer or whatever, we can be here, and you can be in Australia. I can be in the United States. We can have three other people in three other places. Someone circling the globe, on a space station, and we're all here. And so this idea of things have changed, that what was real was actually an illusion, and that's part of the what's the part of the angst that we as a species are facing, is that the three-dimensional world has been pulled out from beneath our feet, like a rug being pulled out beneath our feet, and we don't even realize what happened.
Wow. So, do you feel that is happening more and more? There's an acceleration on the planet right now in terms of that,
Oh,
because it
absolutely,
it's
absolutely.
fascinating to witness and observe, because when I first look at astrology with my limited mind, it's all about, I used to read the horoscopes when I was, a kid in the newspaper, and try and predict the future a little bit.
If you read them online, there's a good chance that I wrote them, because for over 20 years, I wrote a daily horoscope column that had somewhere between 10 and 20 million readers every day.
Wow.
I mean, my daily horoscope column was the column on Google when they were doing content on Yahoo, on AOL, on MySpace, on Huffington Post, on the LA Times. I mean, it was all over the internet. And yet that's part of the problem of astrology, is that the astrology that people perceive is not really the real astrology. It's like a surface interface, and there's something very important behind the apparency of the you're an Aries, I'm a Taurus, she's a Gemini, he's a Virgo, whatever. I mean, that there is a little reality to that, but that whole part of astrology didn't really begin until the 20th century, although one might note that Johannes Kepler, who was not only the guy who figured out the mathematics of planetary motion, but when Isaac Newton was congratulated for his work, he responded, they said, "How can you have amassed so much knowledge in a lifetime?" And Isaac Newton responded, "I see so far because because I stand on the shoulders of giants." And Johannes Kepler was one of those giants, but it's somehow forgotten that Johannes Kepler was actually the court astrologer for Emperor Rudolph, and his scientific discoveries were part of his work in astrology. But the point I'm making here is, even in the late 1400s, late 1500s, early 1600s, when Johannes Kepler was writing, he hated the fact that popular astrology was basically used to decide when to go to war and to figure out whether or not someone was going to get laid. I mean, things have not changed in 400 years in the popular realms. And when people write that Johannes Kepler didn't believe in astrology, no, he didn't believe in that astrology. Just like when someone says, "I don't believe in astrology," I say, "I don't believe in the astrology you don't believe in," because there's two different
Wow.
things.
So, how do we best use astrology? Because there seems to be human nature, like the unknown seems to scare a lot of people. And you can see that online now. There's all this uncertainty, things is shifting in the world, everything's accelerating. There's talk of AI, there's talk of, we've just had the elections in the US. Like, there's so much noise, news, and fear. And then there's this grasp to try and predict the future, see the future, just to allow ourselves to feel safe, really. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think the three two-letter combinations that have people on edge are AI, AR, and ET. AI, artificial intelligence or artificial superintelligence. AR, augmented reality, the interface of silicon or external neural systems to the human body or mind. And then ET, extraterrestrial. Those three initials have people kind of on edge, and yet you're right. I think that largely we fear the unknown. It's some sort of biological training that for survival, we need to know what's going on. And so I think there is a bit of mammalian, or maybe even it goes back to reptilian, ancient, back brains stuff that fears the unknown, and we want to know it. The problem is that so many of us moderners are so afraid of the unknown that we've become really good at this Freudian Jungian mechanism that we call denial. And that is, if I don't know about it, then it doesn't exist, and then I can feel
Yeah.
better.
So how do we best use astrology? Like with your experience, and how do you use it in your personal life? Like how does it all come together? Because
Well, how I use it in my personal life might be different than how someone else might, because I've been using it in my personal life now. Let me just think, for about
yeah,
55
fair enough.
years. I'll be turning 76 in a couple of months. And I really got into astrology in a serious way somewhere around age 18 or, in that period of time. And I've been studying it ever since. And I wish I quit studying it maybe in my late 20s, because I thought I pretty much knew what I needed to know then. And now I realize I don't know anything pretty much. So it's like, a fool's errand to try to know everything. But there are some very real things. I think I think the bottom line, if there's such a thing, is that astrology becomes simply a way of seeing things that you didn't know existed before, that you didn't think about, that you didn't see. Now, there are so many ways of exploring astrology, because all astrology is saying is that there is a direct correlation between the macro and the microcosms. And, you asked before, what is consciousness? We're just basically an interference pattern in the soup of vibrations. And we're like surfers surfing the interference of the very low frequency macrocosmic vibrations. Even if you think of the planets, I mean, we look out at the stars or the sky at night and we see things that are what I would call low frequency vibrations, meaning that Saturn basically is a hum of about 3 cycles a century, because it takes Saturn about 30 years to go around the sun. So in a century, it's made just over 3 cycles. The
Wow.
moon, although you can see it when it's full and go, wow, look at that, it's a big particle in space. The moon is really 13 cycles a year. It's a frequency event. But just like the quantum physicists discovered that when they went to look at the subatomic particles, Einstein's photons, a photon is a particle of light. And Einstein was awarded a Nobel Prize for his work in this area. But when you look at a photon of light, you can see the particle. But when you don't look at it, it continues to move, but not as a particle. It moves as a wave. There's no question about it. Electromagnetic energy, and light is an electromagnetic energy. It propagates like a wave. And so do the planets. So when we stretch our ears or our mind to begin to see, to begin to experience these lower frequency vibrations of the moon at 13 cycles a year. Now, if you're a woman, you may not make the connection directly, but you're humming to the tune of the moon, because women bleed at roughly the same cycle that the moon becomes new to full to new to full. It's roughly a 28-day cycle. It varies certainly from person to person slightly, but but the thing is that every planet has its hum, every planet has its rhythm, and we dance to these very, very low frequency, subsonic. We can't hear them with our ears, but to these vibrations without even knowing that they're there. So how does astrology become useful? It becomes useful by looking at those vibrations and realizing that the important events in our lives actually correspond to these cycles that we never even imagined, never even thought about. And once we begin to notice them, then we can begin to see them coming in the future. Astrology doesn't tell us what to do. It just tells us when these nodal points, these intersections in these, you think of ourselves as surfers on invisible waves, just like light let me say this again, just like light surfs on a wave that it creates as it's surfing. That's how electromagnetic waves propagate, as if they're creating the waves that the particles are surfing on. And we are doing the same. And once you begin to realize that, you begin to look at your life and you begin to see these intersections coming up. Astrology doesn't tell you what to do at the intersections. Astrology might suggest that if you're not paying attention, this may be the course of least resistance. This may be what would happen if you don't interfere with awareness. And that's what astrology offers us. It offers us a tool to extend our awareness, just like yoga or meditation or psychedelic or entheogenic substances, journeying, all of these things expand our awareness. Psychedelic just means to expand awareness. Entheogenics is to create God. And, entheo is theos, God, theology, the study of God. And there's a whole concept that's part of the astrological history, and that's a word called theurgy. Urgy is like erg, a unit of work, and theurgy is working with God. And until the age of enlightenment, really even Johannes Kepler, when he discovered the laws of planetary motion, it was always thought, at least in the West, and when I say in the West, I don't mean the geographical West, I mean the Western way of thinking, which I obviously would include Australia and many other English-speaking nations. But in the West, we always we made the assumption that there was something out there that we had to master. There was something wrong with that. And yet this idea of working with God, because in the West, anything that wasn't fallen, anything that wasn't in the three-dimensional world, anything in the Catholic tradition that wasn't born of original sin, that had physical material reality, everything else was only for God. And it was when man began, I say man, humans began pushing the intellect into these previously invisible realms, that's when we began to realize that these artificial limitations were simply artificial limitations. And so that we have the ability to make invisible visible. And therefore we have the ability through awareness. And this is really basic Buddhism, that the only thing we get to change is our awareness. As our awareness changes, then we have choices that we didn't know we had before. And that's why I do, or that's why I use, that's why I teach astrology, is simply as a tool to increase our awareness.
My brain is officially working really hard here. It's I love it. I absolutely love it. So just to recap on that, because for me, fundamental awareness has been certainly something that's had a huge impact in my life. And it's amazing how you just tied it all into that. So what you're saying is then, with the planets and the hums and the different frequencies that they present and the different cycles, because like you say, Saturn, goes around the Earth 3 and a bit times or whatever it be in a century. Depending on that, then we have an awareness now to ride that frequency wave when it's affecting us at this planet, or we can get dumped by the wave if we don't have the awareness.
So let me give you just a couple of examples, because when I meet someone who says, I don't believe in astrology, I go, interesting, how do you live? And they go, what do you mean, how do I live? I go, well, if you don't believe in astrology, then you're not using a calendar. I mean, how do you get by? And they go, well, our calendar, that has nothing to do with astrology. Well, a month is a month. It's one moon cycle, and a half of that is a fortnight, and a half of that is a week, and there's 7 days in the week because there are 7 visible planets. And they're named the Moon Day, Saturn Day, Sun Day, Mars Day, Mercury Day, Venus Day, Jupiter Day. I mean, we get translations from either the Latin or from the Scandinavian. But if you don't believe in astrology, then you're not using a calendar. We base our time on a system based upon dividing by 12 because it's such a useful number. That's why there's 12 signs in the zodiac. It's not like there's 12 signs up there. We made all that shit up. We made it up because we can think in a way where we can divide cycles up in a half and a half of the half, or into a third. And so we do that 12 hours of daytime, 12 hours of nighttime, 12 months a year, even though there's 13 moon cycles, our calendar's sloppy. But the point is that we're using astrology all the time. In fact, we celebrate the astrological return of the sun in all of our lives from the time we're 1 year old. We don't, but our parents at our first birthday have a celebration. And in astrology, the sun is illumination, it's self-awareness, it's vitality. And so every year on our birthday, when from Earth's point of view, the sun is back in the same place. It's not the sun that's moving. We know it's the Earth that's moving. But when the sun from Earth's point of view returns to the same place, we have a party. We celebrate ourselves And not only that, we light a candle, we focus our awareness, we state intentions. This is an old witchy kind of a thing. And then we blow out the candle, we make a wish, and that wish comes through. It's just basically, it's a ceremony of focusing awareness and letting it go around the return of the sun every year. But here's the thing. Every planet returns, but they're invisible on our calendar. For example, every culture in the Western world, at least, has some awareness about what we might call the under 30, over 30 thing. If you're under 30, something's different about people over 30. They're adults, they're grown up, they're different. If you're over 30, people under 30, even if they're precocious and smart and cool, there's something that hasn't happened yet in their life. And what happens is that for everyone around age 29 and a half, give or take 4 or 5 months, Saturn makes one complete cycle and we celebrate our first Saturn birthday. Saturn is the planet of wisdom and of age. Saturn in Latin is Chronos in Greek, which is father time, Chronos. That's Saturn. And everyone, whether they're aware of it or not, how old?
I just turned 50.
Okay. So if you look back in your life at around age 28, 29, 30, almost everyone has changes that happen then that typically involve buying a home, selling a home, changing jobs, changing careers, getting married, getting divorced, having kids, going back to school. I mean, major, major life changes that for whatever reason, we're not taught about. It's invisible, but everyone goes through some changes around that period of time that because Saturn's a 28, 29 year cycle. It's the origin of the ancient tradition. You break a mirror, you have 7 years of bad luck. You know that saying? Or in the Bible, Joseph's dream of 7 years of feast and 7 years of famine. The point here is that 1/4 of a Saturn cycle is about 7.5 years. And a quarter of any cycle is where the action is, because the 90-degree angle in sacred geometry, in mythology, even the sign of the cross, of being hung on the cross, the 90-degree angle, that's maximum stress, maximum tension. And so the idea is that even the physical substances of our body every 7 years are pretty much completely changed out. The pattern stays the same, but the physicality is different because we're always replacing cells. So if you do something really bad from a standpoint of astrology, it really takes a quarter of a Saturn cycle for it to really work completely through the system. Point being, we don't learn this in school. If we knew that in our 20s, we should be looking ahead to about when we're 28, 29, 30, and the earlier we begin to think of, what do I want to do when I grow up? What do I want to be? What's worked in my life so far? We think these things anyhow, but we think that we're doing it on our own. What hasn't worked in my life? What changes do I need? What do I need to do now so that I can survive? And then typically 7 years later in our mid-30s, those things that we didn't choose right are back in our face. And in our mid-30s, we're going, oh my God, I shouldn't have done that. I should have done that. And we get divorced or we go through some sort of difficult time. My point is, we can follow these changes like clockwork through astrology, not just in generalized patterns like I'm doing now. Like every year on your birthday, you blow out a candle and you make a wish without realizing that you're participating in an astrological ceremony. But there's personalized rhythms that become like clockwork that we can look back at our lives and see these junction points and then go, wow, I'm coming up to another junction point in 2 years. What happened the last 3 times? What did I do? What did I do right? What did I do wrong? And where do I want to go between now and then so I can be ready to make these changes?
Wow. Funnily enough, I emigrated to Australia when I was 30, just as I was turning 30. Major move.
And I would say not funny enough, but right on time, and I would imagine that, somewhere in your not not necessarily redeciding. I don't know if you know if that's a word, but we often look back and we go through a process of where do I need to make these mid-course corrections, as far as getting me back on track or staying on track. And again, these are more generalized patterns, which is how most people get into astrology. But when you say, I'm a Sagittarius or she's a Taurus or whatever, it's like going into a room and being told that there's 10 people in the room and 5 of them are from Indonesia and 5 of them are from London. You could probably relatively quickly tell the difference. You could probably even make some generalized statements and be more correct than wrong about most of their lives, but you wouldn't know anything about them individually. In astrology, by knowing your time of year of birth, your sun sign, where the sun was in relationship to the earth, because every year the earth goes around. And so every year in February, from Earth's point of view, the sun is in the same sign, whether it's in late Aquarius or early Pisces, because our months don't quite match up. But the point is that unless you do a complete chart workup of locating not only the sun, your birthday, but the moon, which changes signs every 2 1/3, 2.5 days, and Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus. And when you put all of that together, you end up with something that's as individualized as a thumbprint. And now I don't know just about what country you came from. I know the timing of the major events in your life, and I know way more about, and I'm going to call this the map of your life, because we don't all follow the map of our life as is, meaning that once we learn with whatever tools we might have, and astrology is not the only tool. There's all kinds of human development tools for increasing our awareness, whether it's yoga or meditation or breathing practices or athletic pursuits or things that change or physical changes in our diet and our lifestyle that change our course of least resistance. It's like water falling from the sky is going to find the ocean eventually. But it may take 400 million years if it gets locked up in ice in the Arctic, but it's still eventually going to get to sea level. And we, if we have no awareness, are like water falling to sea level through our life. We're going to take the course of least resistance. But as we develop awareness, we learn we can build a dam here on this river, and we can use this water in seasons of dryness. And we can also back up the water enough that we can make a hydroelectric dam, create electricity, and maybe even water these fields that otherwise were dry. And we're just doing that by increasing our awareness. And the same token goes for astrology. It's a map, but how we use it or use other tools to increase our awareness, we're not just all water falling from the sky and landing in the ocean.
So does that mean that, like, for some reason, that this question just came in as you were sharing the last bit, is that our life, in some respects, before we were born, is predetermined? I mean, what are your thoughts on these things?
Well, yeah, predetermined, the issue of what might be called fate and free will is as interesting to me. I actually gave a lecture in Kolkata a number of years ago and was given an award for this lecture because the lecture was entitled a quantum physics look, it was called a quantum perspective on fate versus free will.
Oh.
Because in quantum physics, we talked about this earlier, there's this thing called the particle wave duality. That light is a particle when we're looking at it. An electron is a particle when we're looking at it. But when we're not looking at it, it's a wave. And it's how can these things be particles and waves at the same time? And yet by looking at the wave, and there's this wonderful thing called the double slit experiment, which you can find animated versions of it on YouTube. Actually, if you go to YouTube and do a YouTube search on particle wave duality and Fred Alan Wolf, there's this wonderful 5-minute animated piece that's just brilliant. That how can a subatomic particle be a particle when we're looking at it and yet travel like a wave? Well, how can the moon be a particle when we're looking at it and yet it still travels like a wave? what does this have to do with particle wave? What does particle wave have to do with fate, free will? It's very simple. Fate is to particle as free will is to wave. It's a spectrum. And Heisenberg was awarded a Nobel Prize for what's called the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, which states with mathematical matrix crazy math, it states that at any given moment, the more we know about where a subatomic event is, the less we know about where it's going. The more we know about where it's going, the less we know about where it is in that moment. In other words, particle wave both exist, but in any given moment, the more we know about particle, the less we know about wave. The more we know about wave, the less we know about particle. And that same thing is true with fate and free will. We come from many cultures in ancient times where there was very little free will because we were so concerned with having food and or shelter for the night. That was all the compression of the moment, the moment of particleness. We live in a world now where we seem to have many privileged people like you and I. We have more openness to explore the waveness, the free willness. And yet there are times in life where things contract and we have to do things, or it's like we lose our own agency and we have to respond to what may feel like the weight of gravity, or an astrologer might say the heaviness of Saturn, that contractive 90-degree angle, of the weight of the illusion of the three-dimensional world. And then there are other times where it's almost like whatever we imagine, somehow we can make happen. And so fate and free will work together. And yes, the moment that we are born has a mathematical, sacred geometrical quality that, with no infringement of anything from the outside, would manifest in a certain relationship to the ongoing movement of the planet. But nothing happens in a vacuum. So we are always responsive to what goes on in our lives around us. And yet, even still, my collection of books back there may be very different than your collection of books, because somehow we have magnetism or something that attracts or constellates these experiences or interests that create totally different ways of pulling the universe into reality around ourselves individually.
Wow. Okay. I think I've said wow about 5 times on this podcast so far, Rick. So where does that lead into then as the collective, well, fate and free will, and as our individual contribution to a collective and to the age of what we are moving into and everything that's going on the planet? Are we in the age of Aquarius now? I don't know. Or what's going on?
Probably about 100 years away from it,
right.
technically. And there's a much deeper technical discussion there having to do with the Earth's wobble. Like when you spin a top, as it slows down, it begins to wobble before it falls over and stops. Well, the Earth wobbles backwards once every just under 26,000 years. The ancients knew this. We moderners know it. It's called the precession of the equinox, which means every year on the first day of spring or fall, depending upon whether you're north or south of the equator, that if you draw a straight line from the Earth to the sun on that first moment of spring or autumn, that every year it's 1/72nd of a degree away from where it was the year before, which may not seem like a lot, but over 72 years, that's a degree over several centuries. All of a sudden, the planets seem to be in different signs from where they were 1,000 years ago. And so this is like a piece unto itself that actually determines these astrological ages that are about 2,170 years, 76 years long. And for all practical purposes, one might assume that the age of Pisces began around the birth of Jesus, whether you're Christian or not, because that's how we count our years, from the event, give or take, maybe even a generation or so from that time before or after that moved us into this age, which would lead me to believe that the age of Aquarius really will begin in about 100 years or so from now. But when you look back at these larger 2,100 year ages, you see that there are 100, 200 years coming and going, and we're definitely in a transition period from the age of Pisces, which had to do with the two fish swimming in opposite direction. Incidentally, the fish is a symbol of Christianity, and the Vesica Pisces, the vessel of the fish swimming, connected by a golden thread that was really the two forces of nature. You could call them male and female, or spirit and matter, or good and evil. But it was the priest that had that magical connection, and therefore the mystical connection between these opposite forces was only available to the ordained priesthood. Whereas now in the age of Aquarius, or as we're moving into it, all of a sudden everyone has these experiences directly. We're not there yet. We're far from there. And a lot of the things that we talked about at the beginning, the AI, AR, ET, are all part of what's going to become more and more integrated as we move into what some people fear as transhumanism, posthumanism, the technological infringement onto our biological carbon-based nervous systems. I mean, these are processes that we might fight because they seem so alien to us, and they do to me too. I mean, I am a carbon-based human being. On the other hand, 200 years ago, our ancestors were basically destroying machines in London because machines were like alien beings. They were not natural. They were, the industrial age was considered to be something that would make us non-human. And maybe we already are non-human compared to what if we bumped into someone somehow through some sort of time distortion, if we bumped into an ancestor, who lived in the 200 or 300s AD, pretty much anywhere in the planet, and we took them into our life today, that they would, this is not humans. This is some sort of other than human. And so we are certainly at that point, and these larger pieces of collective unfolding, I think, are important. But again, just like we can open our awareness individually by our age, by counting our solar returns, our birthdays, or our Saturn return, at age 29, 30, and then again at age 57, 58. We have these periods of time in our lives that make sense. We can look, for example, at like every month, every moon, when the moon goes around the earth and lines up with the sun that's moved on a little bit each time, that these new moons are like points on a clock that begin a cycle every month. We can do this with any pair of planets, and astrologers do, and astrologers have done this, but this wasn't even possible until we had a computer. I can go to my computer and say, give me a listing of the actual dates of every time that Saturn, the planet of the three-dimensional reality, Saturn, Chronos, Father Time, compression of time into an event. Give me a listing of every time Saturn lined up with Pluto, which is the Lord of the underworld, that which is hidden. And by tracing that back 3,000 years, I come up with a map of almost every important event that's happened to humanity in the past 3,000 years. How does that work? I mean, I'll give you just a quick, just a current day example. And this, I mean, I could talk, well, I have given 3-4 hour workshops just on this one rhythm, but any two planets have these rhythms. So for example, Saturn takes about, let's say 30 years. It's 29 and a half years to go around once. And Pluto takes 248 years, let's say 250, close enough. That means when Saturn's gone around once in 30 years, it'll take a handful more years for it to catch up to Pluto because Pluto keeps moving. So Saturn lines up with Pluto every 33 to 38 years. It's a variable cycle because Pluto sometimes moves faster or slower, depending upon how close it is to the sun or far away it is to the sun. But here's the deal. Saturn and Pluto, like a full moon, were opposite in 1898. They were joined in August of 1914. They were opposite in 1931. They were joined again in the summer of 1947. They were opposite again in 1965. They were joined again in 1982. They were opposite again in 2001. And they were aligned again on January 12th of 2020, within 12 hours of the announcement of the first Wuhan virus and the announcement of that genome, within 12 hours of the actual alignment. But their actual alignment in August of 1914 was within 3 days of the assassination of Duke Ferdinand and kicking off World War I. When they aligned in 1947, it was the same week that Britain basically gave India and Pakistan their freedom, and there was the partition of India and Pakistan. And at the opposition points, the fall of 2001, the bombing of the World Trade Tower here in the United States. At the opposition in 1931 was not a good one, but that was the year that Hitler was elected chancellor. It was the year that Mussolini came to power, Stalin came to power, Japanese were invading China, the United States was in a Great Depression. In 1898, at their opposition, here's a crazy one, that was the year that not only Spain lost its holding in the Philippines and pretty much all over the world, except at the opposition in 1834 when it lost most of South America. I mean, these alignments are crazy. But in 1898, that was the year at the Saturn-Pluto opposition, like the full moon kind of, not a moon, but full Saturn to Pluto. That was the year of the founding of the World Zionist Organization. In 1914, World War I at the alignment, but that was also when Lawrence of Arabia went into what is now the Arabian countries and convinced the Arabs to fight on the side of the Allies, guaranteeing them protection from the Ottomans, from the Turks, if the Allies won the war, which is why England was tied by treaty to protect Palestine and the French Lebanon. And it was the carving up of that whole part of the world in colonial, kind of control. And that was 1914. 1931, the British announced martial law in Palestine because they didn't know what to do, because by then the Zionist movement had already moved into Palestine and they had treaties. They were supposed to protect Palestine from the Turks, from external rule, but they didn't know what to do. They declared martial law. In 1947, 46, 47, 48, that was when the United Nations was founded and Israel was founded. In 1965, at the next opposition, there was incredible wars, the 6-Day War, the Yom Kippur War, 65, I think. And in 1982 was when Israel invaded Lebanon. And of course, you go on here, you begin to see these things. They go back to the Crusades, the timing of the Crusades. These events are like clockwork. So what do? The same thing we do in our individual life. And that is, the more we become aware of this, the more we can see that the timing, for example, in modern times, the timing of the Palestinian attack on Israel being part of this much larger scenario, and the dates of Israel's response and the things that are still going on now, kind of coming to, a culmination on some level in this little local universe we're in right now, is the end of this month. And we're seeing this quote unquote, ceasefire or whatever, but it's not going to solve this deeper. It's like a forest fire that gets put out, but then there's little brush fires that reignite it again and again and again and again. And each time, allegedly, our awareness can become greater so that we can make different decisions rather than unconsciously just looking for the next button to push to blow up someone with a bomb. Now, are we getting this right? Well, from a macro perspective right now, it doesn't look so. But I don't think that what's going on right now is necessarily indicative of the longer term trajectory although anyone, including myself, who says they know, doesn't. However, I think what we're seeing is I want to say last, but I don't know that it's the last. But we're seeing is the last throes of loss of control from an authoritative, colonial, patriarchal, imperialistic, greedy, got to control nature and need to, basically take advantage of the external because in Malthusian economics, there's not enough to go around, which means I need to get mine. And if you don't have yours, that's not my concern. And in fact, if you got something I want, I should take it from you because when things get scarce, I need to make sure that I have enough for me, which is really the logic that projected England to creating the British Empire, which, as you may or may not know, was an idea that was brought up by the astrologer of those times, John Dee, who in his mind created this idea and created the coronation that became the founding of the British East Indies Trading Company in 1600 and the whole age that, that pursued the Elizabethan,
Do you feel these throws will be kind of coming into over the next few years, or are we talking decades?
Oh, we're in the midst of, I mean, we've been in the midst of it really since the mid 1960s was really when astrologically things began to explode. And there's a whole technological side to this also. But again, then in 1989, 90, 91, 92, 93, there was another astrological cultural intersection. And then again, 2012 to 2015, when the world was exploding, Arab Spring and changes of political landscapes. And then at the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in January of 2020, that was part of an initiation that we're still going through right now. 2024, 25, 26, 27 are really turning point years. Whatever happens during this time, by 26, 27, 28, there won't be any going back. It's
Wow.
it's like mixing copper and tin. Copper is malleable, tin is brittle but malleable. When you melt them together and then they form bronze, it's done.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
And in a way, we've been in this very malleable period of time. We're on the tail end of it, but the bifurcation that we're experiencing all over the planet, not just in the United States, all over the world, is basically this attempt to make tin rule versus copper rule. I mean, that's kind of stretching the analogy, but they're melting together and something is going to come out of this. And within a few years, whenever it is that happens, we're not going to be able to undo it for a while. Doesn't mean it's, however things fall and things are going this way and or that way. And the confusing thing is that there's so many separate issues that make it so that I don't care what you believe on this issue, you believe that on something else. And whatever the political divides are, you find yourself swapped and, it kind of agreeing with someone that you don't agree with on everything else. And it makes it very complicated. But I think ultimately what's happening right now is that we are going to discover, or we are discovering. It doesn't matter who you voted for when. It doesn't matter whether you're leftist, rightist, whether you're for or against this or that, red or blue in this country, whatever your divisions are. What we're all beginning to realize is that we're all in this together, and one way or another, we're going to get out of it together or we're not. And we're not going to get out of it with my way instead of your way, or your way instead of my way. We're only going to get out of it if we can figure out some way to get out of it together. And that's going to be the frightening thing for most of us on one level or another. And I think that's where we are at, and where that goes, time will tell. But, we all have our part to play, and the part that we each have to play is based upon each of us increasing our individual awareness because when we increase our individual awareness, that increases the awareness of people around us, because awareness is contagious. And that then increases the awareness of a nation state. The problem, of course, is that most governments around the world operate on some form of repression or suppression. And therefore, this wildfire of what appears to be in your world and my world, an awakening, is met by the fear and the suppression and the anger and the authoritative, gotta get rid of this. And astrology is part of that, but it's just one little part of a much wider fear of being awakened, or wokeism, whatever that is. Our part is, individually, is to become more aware. Carl Jung, in the last book he wrote, a book called The Undiscovered Self, he wrote that world peace will never come by politicians creating treaties. World peace will only come by individuals in the world creating peace within their individual minds.
Amen to that, right? And it comes back to love and kindness for me. And I often wonder that if we are consciousness from a greater consciousness system that is unified, that to me, it only makes sense that becoming more unified species here is where we're heading. It really does.
Which then gets us to this whole question of where is consciousness? And, my long-term dear friend, Bruce Lipton, I've known Bruce for 30 years now. This idea that consciousness arises not in the brain. Consciousness arises in the cell wall. Consciousness arises in the boundaries we create. As you may know, Bruce's breakthrough work when he was a Stanford microbiologist, doing research at Stanford Medical Center, was basically in immunology. How do you know what's you versus not you? How do I know what's me versus not me? And where is this illusion of me? Where does it end? Does it end at the skin? Is it the brain? This idea that consciousness exists, and we are kind of like radios. When you break a radio, the broadcast station doesn't go off the air. The music isn't inside the radio any more than consciousness is inside of our brain. And there's a much longer story there, but I think it's important to understand that this is the role that we have in our external world. And in fact, it's important to understand that we now live in a biological system where we are within an exonervous system. In the words of Marshall McLuhan, we've flipped out. The internet, the World Wide Web, is like we've created an exonervous system that is actually part of us. And we are, just like a crab has an exoskeleton, we have an exonervous system. And to think that we are separate from it is an illusion. And there's another whole then piece of that where we take those rhythms and we keep going into lower frequencies until we realize that the hum of Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, Saturn, Mars, that these are all part of the hum of the radio station that we play based upon the signal that we got in our birth.
Isn't it mind-blowing? I just love listening to you, mate, and explaining and breaking this down. It's just, the wonders of the world are just phenomenal. I've just got one question left just to wrap things up for you, which I'm just curious.
The answer is yes.
Is 2025, is there any, bringing out to our awareness, are there any astrological cycles or events that we should be aware of this year?
Yeah, too many to put in a single sentence. But whenever slow-moving planets change signs or make particular angles with each other, those are notable. Or in a medical terminology, they're what a physician would call remarkable, meaning let's write something down on that patient's record. There's so many remarkable things happening in 2024, 5, 6, 25, 2025 in particular. We have 3 slow-moving planets all changing signs around the same time in harmonious, sacred geometrical relationships with one another that will begin, as early as February, March, April, May of this year, that are setting the tone for the years ahead. And again, we could, if you want, at some point in time, come back and do a deeper dive on that. It can be broken down into very simple English. There's just too many pieces to just put it into a sentence, other than saying 2025 is a significant and major year of transition. And the who we are culturally, socially, politically, economically, consciously, technologically, the who we are today or last year, and the who we will be in a year or two or three are like, on some level, like night and day. And again, anyone who says they know what's around the bend can't, because this bend is too large and it's happening too fast. It's like one of those curves that's like a hyperbolic curve. We're at that point of it going straight up.
Yeah.
Whether it's Mayans called, the end of that calendar, theoretically 2012, or whether it was what Terrence and Dennis McKenna, I know you had Dennis on the show a few years ago, what they call time wave zero, or the concept of novelty. There's something that's happening now that's happening so fast that the illusion of past, present, and future are disintegrating. And this is astrologically as important a year as anyone would know if they're just paying attention to what's going on out there. You don't need to be able to read the map to look around and go, I'm going that way, not that way. I mean, astrology is a useful, very useful map. It's a fantastic metaphor. But if you're in tune with the hum, you don't need the map. You just know which way to go.
Mate, where can I send more people to check out your work? What's the best website? I'll have links below, because I know you got a YouTube channel as well, don't you?
Yeah, my YouTube channel, I do a monthly astrological forecast. It's a bit intense for those people who don't know any astrology, but if you let the words wash over you, it's packed with information for the month ahead. There's no for Aries it'll be this, for Pisces it'll be that. It's what I like to call the cosmic weather. It's the lay of the energetic landscape for the month ahead. But that I do a new one of those on the first of every month on my YouTube channel. It's just at Rick Levine, Rick Levine Astrologer on YouTube.
Wow.
Anywhere on the web, I have a mailing list you can find on my website, which is Rick Levine Astrologer. I have a Patreon for people who want to dig deeper. It's patreon.com. What a surprise /Rick Levine. If you can't find me on the web, you shouldn't be on the web.
Do you have like a beginner's guide for astrology or anything like that?
I have fundamentals courses that I've taught through a really excellent site called Astrology Hub, and they offer a series of my courses called Fundamentals of Astrology. Yes.
Phenomenal. Mate, look, thank you, first of all, for coming on the podcast today. You're a bloody legend, man. And I feel like I'm scratching the surface with you just by...
It's a real pleasure. Wow. It's been fun. I look forward to picking this up at some point in time. If and when
I'd feel blessed if you come back on.
If I have
absolutely.
Down under, you'll be on my...
Totally, mate. We can go and get a longboard if you surf. It's not bad around here, actually. But thanks so much, Rick.